Most people treat the potato like a single basic ingredient. You pick some up at the store, you cook them, and you move on with your day. But somewhere between 17th century Belgium and a modern street stall in Mumbai, the world quietly engineered 47 completely different foods out of that one crop. Yet, most of us have only ever tried about 10 of them. The average person organizes potatoes into two groups, fried or not fried, which is a fine starting point but misses the actual logic behind the food. The real organizing principle comes down to technique, texture, and culture. Once you look at it through that lens, the whole thing finally clicks into place, and you stop seeing a list of random dishes and start seeing a map of human ingenuity. By the end of this video, you are going to have that map in your head. We are going through every major potato preparation on the planet, and we're grouping them by the logic that actually connects them. If you enjoy deep dives into ingredients, cooking methods, and food history, you should know that 98% of you watching right now are not actually subscribed. Now is a great time to fix that so you don't miss the next one. Category 1. The fried icons. The first category is the one you already know by heart. These preparations rely on high heat, fast cooking, and maximizing surface area because the more of the potato you expose to hot oil, the crispier the result becomes. This entire category is essentially a global competition to see how far you can push that specific idea. You have to start with French fries, even though they aren't actually French. They were invented in Belgium in the late 1600s along the Meuse River, where local villagers had a long-standing habit of frying small fish. When the river froze over one winter and the fish disappeared, the locals cut potatoes into thin fish shapes and fried those instead. American soldiers stationed in Belgium during World War I tasted them and assumed they were French because the Belgian army spoke the language, so they brought the name back home. Belgium has spent over a century trying to correct the record, but nobody seems to be listening. The specific cut of the potato determines everything about how a fry tastes and feels. Shoestring fries are sliced so thin that there is almost no interior left, which means you are eating almost entirely surface area and pure crunch. Steak fries flip that logic entirely by going thick enough that the outside crisps up while the inside stays soft and steamy. Crinkle cuts use ridges to trap more sauce, showing that every variation is just a different way to solve a texture problem. Waffle fries became a massive hit thanks to Chick-fil-A in the 1980s. That grid pattern happens when you rotate the potato 90 degrees between every pass on a mandolin, and that simple rotation creates a lattice instead of a flat slice. The result gives you more crispy edges per fry than any straight cut could ever produce, and the shape became so iconic that when competitors released their own versions, customers insisted they tasted like Chick-fil-A, regardless of where they actually bought them. It is a rare case where a cutting technique turned into a global brand identity. Curly fries work on that same surface area principle, but they arrived through Arby's using a specialized spiral blade. The specific seasoning of paprika, garlic, and onion powder became so locked into the public memory of that shape that the flavor and the spiral became inseparable. When other restaurants tried to sell them, the shape alone was enough to trigger that specific taste memory in customers. Tater tots were actually born from industrial waste. In 1953, the founders of Ora-Ida had piles of leftover scraps from cutting fries, and instead of tossing them out, they chopped the bits up and mixed them with flour and seasoning. They pushed that mixture through a mold to create small cylinders, but Americans were skeptical at first because nobody wanted to pay for what looked like trash. Ora-Ida eventually dropped the price to almost nothing and gave them away as samples, and once people actually tasted them, full-price sales followed almost immediately. Then, you have the flat fry family, which is where this category gets really interesting on a global scale. Hash browns, latkes, roasty, and bubble and squeak are all the exact same instinct expressed by different cultures. Whether you shred the potato or smash it flat, the goal is to press it into hot fat to get a crispy exterior with a soft center. The Swiss version uses clarified butter, the Korean version might add scallion and egg, and the British version uses up leftover cabbage, but these are all the same discovery made independently across centuries. That covers 12 distinct styles already, and they all share one singular goal: the perfect crust. Category 2. the oven and roasted styles. While the fried category is built entirely around speed, this group is the exact opposite. These preparations rely on dry heat and much longer cook times because they are after something a fryer simply cannot give you. You're looking for depth, softness, and a specific kind of richness that builds up slowly over an hour instead of arriving all at once in a basket. The baked potato is the simplest version of this idea you can find. You take dry oven heat and leave the skin completely intact so the interior can steam itself into something fluffy without needing any added fat. For centuries, this was just cheap peasant food that people ate to survive. But American steakhouses in the 1950s realized something very clever about their customers. A plain baked potato costs a restaurant almost nothing to make, but if you pile sour cream, bacon, cheddar, and chives on top, you can suddenly charge real money for it. The loaded baked potato was never actually a culinary invention. It was a pricing strategy that just happened to taste great. Twice-baked potatoes take that same basic idea and add a whole second act to the process. You bake the potato first, scoop out the steaming flesh to mix it with butter and cheese, and then pack everything back into the skin to bake it a second time. The result is a potato that acts as both the container and the filling at the same time. This became a massive dinner party staple throughout the 1950s and 60s because it required obvious effort, which back then told your guests something very specific about how hard you worked in the kitchen. Nobody ever serves a twice-baked potato by accident. Hasselback potatoes have a much more specific origin story that starts in 1953. At the Hasselbacken restaurant in Stockholm, a culinary student named Leif Ellison was trying to find a brand new way to present roasted potatoes to his customers. He cut thin slices almost all the way through the potato while leaving the base intact, then roasted it with plenty of butter and breadcrumbs, so the slices fanned open like an accordion during the cooking process. The dish stayed a Swedish specialty for decades, and was totally unknown outside of Scandinavia until food bloggers discovered it in the 2000s. It spread rapidly across the internet because it photographs better than almost any other potato dish, meaning a 1953 culinary school experiment became a social media staple 60 years later. Fondant potatoes are the French contribution to this category, and they are still sadly underappreciated outside of professional kitchens. You start by cutting the potato into thick cylinders and searing both flat ends hard in a hot pan. Then you transfer them to the oven in a bath of butter and stock. They slow roast until the exterior is crisp and the interior becomes almost molten as the stock absorbs into the potato while it cooks. The result is somewhere between a roasted potato and a braise, and the texture doesn't really resemble anything else in this entire category. Then we have the layered preparations that everyone loves. Scalloped potatoes use very thinly sliced potato baked in heavy cream until the top layer turns golden and the interior softens enough to serve with a spoon. Au gratin is technically the same exact idea with one major addition, which is a layer of cheese on top that gets melted and browned under the heat. Most Americans use both of these names interchangeably, even though the actual distinction is the cheese, but most French people would find this entire conversation very tiring to sit through. Boulanger takes that layered approach and removes the cream entirely by baking the slices in stock instead. The name comes from an old French practice where villagers would carry their prepared dishes to the local baker after the morning bread baking was finished. This allowed the food to cook slowly in the residual heat of the cooling oven, while the villagers went about their day. The baker didn't have to do anything, and the oven did all the work. Category 3. Doughs, dumplings, and global preparations. Frying and roasting are really just transformations of the potato's surface. But this next category does something much more fundamental to the vegetable. It transforms the actual structure of the potato. Once you cook a potato and work it into a dough, you don't really have a potato dish anymore. And instead, you have a completely different food that just happens to use potato as its base. Most people don't even realize this category exists as a separate group, or they don't realize how many famous dishes actually belong to it. Gnocchi is the most familiar entry point for most of us. These are Italian potato dumplings made by combining cooked mashed potato with flour and egg before they are rolled into small pillows and boiled. The ratio of ingredients matters more than almost anything else in this recipe, because if you use too much flour, you get something dense and rubbery that feels closer to an eraser than a dumpling. Your goal is to use just enough flour to hold the dough together so the finished gnocchi stays light enough to float in the water. When a chef gets it right, it is easily one of the softer and more delicate textures in all of Italian cooking. But gnocchi is really just the Italian answer to a question that cooks all across Europe were asking themselves independently. Poland answered that question with pierogi, which is a potato and cheese filling enclosed in thin dough that gets boiled and then pan-fried in butter until the outside is crisp. Germany and Austria came up with knödel, which are much larger potato dumplings that act like sponges to absorb whatever sauce or broth surrounds them on the plate. Sweden has krupkakor, which are stuffed potato dumplings with a pork filling that are dense enough to be a full meal on their own without any side dishes. Lithuania has cepelini, which were named after the Zeppelin airships they resemble in shape, and these dumplings are so large they are usually served 1 or 2 per person. They are filled with meat or curd cheese and covered in a heavy layer of sour cream and bacon fat, and each of these versions reflects the specific grain and dairy resources of the culture that created it. The croquette is probably the most traveled preparation in this entire category. It started out as a French invention where mashed potato was mixed with egg, shaped into cylinders, coated in breadcrumbs, and deep fried. It moved across Europe as French cuisine spread through high-end restaurants and cookbooks in the 1800s, and then it eventually reached Japan, where it became known as karaage. Something very interesting happened once it arrived, because Japanese home cooks adopted it so completely that karaage stopped feeling like a foreign import within a single generation. Today, it is a staple of both home cooking and convenience store shelves across Japan, and the fillings have diverged from the original French version into curry, crab, and corn variations. Pappardelle takes this structural idea even further than the others. It is popular across Latin America and consists of a ball of seasoned mashed potato stuffed with spiced ground beef, which is then coated in egg and flour and deep fried. The potato functions as both the dough and the main ingredient at the same time, which means the wrapper and the filling are unified into one single object. Aloo tikki and vada pav represent the South Asian branch of this same culinary family. Aloo tikki is a spiced mashed potato patty that is shallow fried and served with fresh chutneys. Vada pav is what happens when you take a spiced potato dumpling, batter it, fry it, and serve it inside a soft bread roll with various condiments. Some food historians like to describe it as the Indian burger, but that framing really undersells how specifically it belongs to the street culture of Mumbai. It isn't just an equivalent to a Western dish, it is its own thing entirely. Category 4. The cultural icons and regional classics. While the first 3 categories focused on what you can do to a potato, this final group is all about what the potato has done to entire cultures. These are the dishes that moved past being simple food and became things people argue about, defend, and feel deeply protective of. Poutine is the perfect example of this kind of cultural weight. It started in rural Quebec back in the late 1950s as a simple mix of French fries, fresh cheese curds, and hot beef gravy. The rule here is that the curds have to be fresh enough to squeak against your teeth when you bite them, and if they don't squeak, most people in Quebec will tell you it isn't real poutine. For decades, Canadians actually treated the dish like an embarrassment or a greasy truck stop meal that tourists weren't supposed to see. That relationship flipped almost overnight when American fast food chains put it on menus across the northern United States in the early 2000s. Within just a few years, poutine went from a dish Canadians apologize for to a national icon they defended fiercely. You can find it today in upscale New York restaurants, topped with truffle oil and foie gras, which is either a massive sign of respect or a total insult depending on who you ask. Potato salad exists in a different kind of tension because in America there are 2 main versions that share almost nothing besides the potato itself. The southern style relies on mayonnaise, mustard, and sweet pickle relish served cold, while the German style uses bacon drippings and vinegar and comes to the table warm. Both sides usually think the other version is a mistake, and since every family has one person whose recipe is considered the gold standard, questioning that recipe at a summer cookout is a genuine social risk. Patatas bravas belong to Spain in the same way poutine belongs to Quebec, acting as a national fixture in tapas bars across the entire country. Even though the base is always fried potato cubes with sauce, the experience changes completely from city to city. In Barcelona, you will usually get a smooth and slightly spicy red sauce, but if you head to Madrid, the sauce is sharper and more intense, often served with a side of aioli. Ordering this one dish in two different Spanish cities will give you two very different perspectives on what it should be. Salchipapas grew out of Peru and eventually took over South America by being exactly what street food needs to be. It is fast, cheap, filling, and gives you that immediate satisfaction of French fries mixed with sliced fried sausage and plenty of sauce. The combination sounds incredibly simple because it is, but that simplicity is exactly why it became a comfort food institution from Lima all the way to Bogota. The potato knish followed a much different path when Eastern European Jewish immigrants brought it to the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the late 1800s. These are thick dough pockets stuffed with mashed potatoes and onions, then baked or fried until they turn golden brown. Yonah Schimmel's Knish Bakery opened on Houston Street in 1910 and is still serving them today, which is amazing considering niche carts used to be as common as hot dog stands in New York. They are much harder to find now, and the people who grew up eating them defend the niche with the intensity of someone watching a piece of their own history slowly disappear. Colcannon, Stamppot, and Stoamp represent the Irish, Dutch, and Belgian versions of the same cold weather logic. These dishes are all about extending mashed potatoes with whatever greens or root vegetables were sitting in the pantry, like kale, cabbage, or carrots. They survived for centuries because they were flexible and filling, and they ensured that nothing in the kitchen ever went to waste. Aligot is the final entry in this category, and it might be the most surprising thing in this entire video. It comes from the Aubrac region of France, where monks originally created it as a restorative meal for pilgrims who were traveling through the area. The method involves stretching mashed potatoes with melted tome cheese and working the mixture until it pulls like taffy. You can actually lift a spoonful and watch it stretch a full foot before it finally breaks, making it look more like a science demonstration than a side dish. The monks who invented it were just trying to feed exhausted travelers, so they didn't mean to create something so dramatic, but they just kept stirring until the texture changed forever. Conclusion: that is 47 different preparations all coming from a single crop. Frying is all about pushing surface area and crunch to the absolute limit, while roasting trades that speed for depth and a soft interior. Doughs allow the potato to become a structural material that can wrap and carry other flavors, and the cultural icons are where the technique stops being the point and identity takes over. I want you to pick one preparation from this list that you have never actually made and try cooking it this week. The dough category is the one most people tend to ignore, so gnocchi is a great place for you to start. The specific ratio of flour to potato will teach you more about food texture than almost any other recipe you can find. I post more breakdowns like this every week here on PantryVerse, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one.